Shalom Aleichem. We are at the end of Perek Shishi, Hilchot Avodah Zarah, the Hilchot Hagoyim, Halacha Yod Daled Otef. Today is Taf Well B'Tammuz Tavshin Pei Daled, the 1st of August 2024, the Minyan HaUmoth. Omer Rabbeinu Moshe, Hanotea Ilan, Lesel HaMizbeach, Ubechol HaAzara. He who plants a tree, either next to the Mizbeach, which was the common practice of over the Avodah Zarah, or anywhere in the area known as the Azara, which includes the Ezrat Kohanim and Ezrat Israel, but not the Ezrat Nashim, which hasn't got the status of an Azara, Minatora. Ben Ilan Sarak, Ben Ilan Ma'achar, any kind of tree, fruit bearing or otherwise. Afal Pisha Asa Otho Noi Lamigdash, even though the person's intention was to beautify the precinct of the Mikdash. Uyofilo, and to make it beautiful and pleasing, and it is in fact so. Harei Zeloka, the person who does so is Hayav Malkuyoth. He has transgressed the mitzvot lo ta'aseh shene'emar lo tita' lecha asherah kol esel mizbach Adonai Elohecha asher ta'aseh lach. Why? Mitpenei shezeh haya derech avodah zarah. נוטעים אילנות לצד מזבח שלה, כדי שיתקבצו שם העם. So this is one more of many examples of practices the Torah forbids. This is the Rambam's understanding, at any rate, as it is with many, many other things, that seeing that these things were common and well-known practices associated with Avodah Zarah, the Torah prohibits such practices, even something as innocuous, you would imagine, as planting a tree, which only goes to show how very particular and pedantic we must be when it comes to taking upon ourselves any practice or any such notion from Umot Ha'olam and accepting upon ourselves. I will mention one example that comes to mind at this moment, and that is the Hasidic practice of lighting candles in the Beit Knesset before every tefillah. Excuse me. I do not know of any source for doing such a thing. If, of course, the room is dark and you need to lighten up the area for obvious reasons, then obviously there's mutar. But I very much suspect, I've not seen this written anywhere, and I cannot prove this, and I hope it's not true, but I very much suspect that this is something that the simple Jews in Eastern Europe picked up from the local population, who were all Catholics or Orthodox Christians. And lighting a candle in a church, one of those churches at least, is in and of itself mitzvah, so to speak. It's just entering the church, lighting a candle, making the sign of the cross, and going on one's way. That is an act of worship and something commendable in the eyes of those churches. And I very much suspect, have always suspected that this is where this practice came from in Hasidic circles. It's not known outside of Hasidic circles, and I think it is something to be avoided. When I say avoided, I mean I think it should be considered asur and not engaged in. The last halacha of this perek, Rambam states, "Asur la'asot achsad ra'oth shel ha'etz b'mikdash, kederech she'osim l'chaserot." אף על פי שהוא בבניין, ואינו עץ נטוע. It is similarly asur because of what the pasuk states, as Rambam says now, "Harhaka yethera shenemar kol etz." Seeing that the pasuk says kol etz, it could have simply said lo tita'lecha ashera, and everyone knows what nashira is, which is a tree. A tree is obviously made of wood. It does not need to be stated. Therefore, kol etz. You might think Chazal added the extra stringency that any wooden structure, such as an achsadra, which is a kind of veranda or what's called in Hebrew a satal or stav, some people might pronounce it, and that is a kind of arcade. In other words, it's an area which is roofed over and supported by pillars. This is a very common type of architecture and architectural feature in the Greco-Roman world. And to do so in the Mikdash, made of wood, is asur. שנאמר כל עץ. אלא כל האכסדראות והסככות היוצאות מן הכתרים שהיו במקדש. So therefore, any such structure, any kind of veranda or arcade, any such covered structure which is not an enclosed structure completely with walls around it, but is covered, but is roofed over and supported on pillars, anything like that in the Mikdash, shela even hayu, lo shel they were and must be made of stone and not of wood.
Rabbi,
Yes.
given the fact that this is a prohibition on any buildings anywhere on Har HaBayit, and not just the Azara, would it be logical to argue from a Kal V'chomer that we wouldn't be able to plant any trees anywhere in the Mikdash, Midrabanan, even on the Har HaBayit or the Ezrath Nashim, like it is now?
That's an interesting point because it raises the question, why did Chazal not state explicitly that this applies to all of Har HaBayit? At least that's not what we see here. So that's a moot point uh, to my mind. It
You think
might be that it's mutar outside the Azara, and it might be there's some logic to say that it should not be done anywhere in Har HaBayit.
you think right here the usage of the word Mikdash refers only to the Azara and not to the entire temple complex, like it often does in the Mishneh Torah?
You're referring to the last halacha, not the previous
Yes,
halacha.
yes.
Hmm.
Sorry.
Okay, well, yes, if we're referring to the last halacha, I was thinking first about planting a tree, where the Rambam says explicitly b'chol ha'azara. But yes, this extension, this lashon in the last halacha Mikdash would seem to imply that it implies. We see in many instances that the word Mikdash generally includes all of Har HaBayit. For instance, lo yelech adam ba'afundato b'Har HaBayit, the end of Masechet Berachot. It's clearly referring not only to the Azara. Um, so the word B'Mikdash generally means all of Har HaBayit. And I think that's probably what it should be understood to mean in this case as well. So I think we could therefore sum up and say where it says b'chol Zarah, that is the Isur Minat Torah, because the Lashon of the Pasuk is Esel Mizbach Hashem. And that refers to the Azara, which is the specific area which includes the Mizbah. But once this Isur was extended to cover any wooden structure, the area was also extended, and therefore Mikdash logically also would imply all of Har HaBayit. פרק 70, הלכות עבודה זרה וחוקות הגויים הלכה א'. מצוות עשה היא לאבד עבודה זרה ומשמשיה וכל הנעשה בשבילה. There is a mitzvah to destroy and remove from the world completely. In other words, to deface and degrade any form of avodah zarah that comes into that comes our way, that is within our power to do so. But then that itself is not enough, as Rambam says in Halacha Perek Het Halacha well, as we shall see later. Rambam speaks about completely destroying Avodah Zarah, Shohek, L'Ruach, as we'll see later. In other words, it has to be L'chalotho min ha'olam. L'chalotho min ha'olam. It has to be completely nullified. The reason for this is, as again, at least according to Rambam, but I think everyone would agree with this statement of Rambam in Moreh Nevuchim, in Chedek Shelishi, Perek Kaf Tet, Rambam discusses there that the main thrust of the Torah throughout is the eradication of all forms of Avodah Zarah, all foreign belief systems, and all practices and artifacts associated with such things. The word Machon, of course, refers to any artifact, any vessel, any object that is somehow associated with Avodah Zarah, even in a fairly remote fashion. In other words, what is a remote fashion? Let's say there is the Greeks, the Romans were very keen on placing statues in human form in all kinds of places, in the public spaces, in the home, in the courtyard, what have you. Sometimes they were just human forms, but other times they were clearly, if you're really going out of your way to make a statue, why not make it a god? So it would be very deliberately an image of Venus, which was a god, or Jupiter, or what have you, all sorts of various divine images. So even though the intention here was essentially to beautify, but it is associated with Avodah Zarah. So it's still Masheha, and it still has to be destroyed. So again, מצוות עשה היא לאבד עבודה זרה ומשמשה וכל הנעשה בשבילה, שנאמר, אבד תאבדון את כל המקומות. Destroy utterly all those places that where the Goyim used to worship these things, so states the Torah. ונאמר, and it states further, כי אם כל תעשו להם, this is, however, what you must do, מזבחותיהם תתוסו, you must shatter their mizbahot, their altars, etc., etc. That is the general statement of the Torah on these matters. Now, Halakha Bet states as follows. I should have been sharing this with you, and now I am. You should be able to see it now. Halakha Bet. Ube'eretz Yisrael, Miswa lidofa hareh, ad shenabed oto mikol arsenu. This miswa is particularly relevant and incumbent upon us in Eretz Yisrael. So when there is any form of Avodah Zarah in Eretz Yisrael, we are commanded to root it out, to find it, track it down, root it out, and destroy it. אבל בחוץ לארץ אין אנו מצווים לרדוף אחריה. But in חוץ לארץ, which is not our land, and we are guests or second or third class citizens there, or what have you, and it's certainly not our land, and we're not, logically, we're not in control, you would imagine. We are not in a position to decide how that society and that public space will look. However, if an area was conquered by Am Yisrael outside of Eretz Yisrael, na'abed kol avodah zarah shebo. שנאמר ויברתם את שמו מן המקום ההוא. So Chazal say as follows: בארץ ישראל אתה מצווה לרדוף אחריהם. In Eretz Yisrael, you are required to be proactive and hunt it down, find it, destroy it. ואין אתה מצווה לרדוף אחריהם בחוץ לארץ. I somehow doubt that the Attorney General at this point in time, and a woman who, the term Attorney General is inaccurate because she's essentially the most powerful person in this country at this point in time. I very much doubt she would accept this thesis of Rambam. I'm sure she would consider it to be a crime, but that's not what the Torah thinks. Let's put it that way.
Rabbi,
Yes.
would you be able to speak a little bit about the role of museums and preserving history to learn from it?
I'm sorry, the role of
things like museums and preserving
museums, yes.
artifacts in order to learn from them.
In other words, should we be allowed to have museums in Eretz Yisrael which contain such things? That's the question.
Yeah, or even outside of Eretz Yisrael, you still need to maintain the artifacts and maintaining
if we have conquered such an area.
Yeah.
Well, it's as we saw in an earlier chapter, it is mutar to learn about Avodah Zarah, but not to practice it, not to worship it. But it is mutar to learn about Avodah Zarah. In fact, the Sanhedrin had to know about these things. So that lichora would seem to indicate that there is a way to maintain such places for purposes of study and knowing and understanding what these things are about. I imagine in a Jewish museum, we would probably have to have signs up all over the place. These are examples of Avodah Zarah, and they're being displayed purely for the purpose of knowing and understanding and learning about these things. But they're all a to'iva, and no one should imagine otherwise, something to that effect. Something else that the said woman would probably not be would not support. I'm sure she could come up with some law on the books whereby that would be construed as a crime. Halacha Gimel or Beth. Avodah Zarah Atma. With Ikro So, shall we say, Avodah Zarah Atma refers to, let's say, an idol. And Sheha could be any of the associated artifacts that might go with it. Let's say it was the custom of these people to pour out libation of wine, nisuch hayayin. So there was a cup and there was some kind of basin or what have you. So those are masham masheha. for example, with Hikrovet Shela, that includes anything that's placed on the Mizbeach or placed before it. So in Christianity, for example, statues of Yeshua Nosri, Shem Rasha'im Yilkov, obviously would be considered Avodah Zarah Atzma. Mishneh, in the case of many churches, not all, would be any of the objects that are used in that worship, such as the chalices, the other incense burners, what have you, that exist in Orthodox churches, the Catholic Church. These things would be Mishneh, and with Hikrovet Shela would include in the case of Christianity, the wine and the wafer, known together as the Eucharist, which is the Ikar Avodah Zarah, the main, the central act of worship in these religious systems. In other religious systems, down to the present day, you have sacrifice, which includes therefore animals, or not necessarily animals. It can also be even something as lichora, innocuous, as a plate of rice. There are a number of countries in Southeast Asia and India where the people offer regularly, place before a statue of Buddha, for example, place different types of food and what have you. That's tikrovet. This includes any building, any structure, anything at all that is associated with Avodah Zarah. So the entire temple and what have you. Asur bahana, it is asur to benefit in any way from such any of these items or aspects of this Avodah Zarah. As it says, you may not bring into your home and benefit from anything to do with Avodah Zarah, which is referred to as To'ivah, something disgusting, unseemly. And he who does benefit in some way from one of these things, is chayav malkuyov twice. As we just said, there is another mitzvah lo ta'aseh, not to have in your possession anything at all that was associated with Avodah Zarah. Even though your intention is purely one of greed, amassing wealth because it's made of gold or silver or what have you, it's asur. Halacha Daled or Gimel. Behema shehikrivuha la'avodah zarah. So therefore, any behema, any animal that was slaughtered and offered up to Avodah Zarah, kula asura. All of it, every part of it is asur, may not be benefited from in any way. Afilu pirsha wa'asmutheha, even its offal, and the bones thereof, and the horns thereof, utlafeha, and its hooves, wa'ora, and the skin of the animal. Hakol asur bahana, it is all asur. Therefore, אם היה בעור סימן שיודע בו שזה העור תקרובת עבודה זרה הוא, כגון שהיו עושים. So if, for example, a Jew, let's say it could be in the course of warfare, it could be in other situations. Let's say he comes across a warehouse or a room, a place where many animal skins, tanned, let's assume, are being kept. Now, it was often the case that if it was for the purpose of Avodah Zarah, there was some kind of sign made in the skin of the animal, some kind of a hole or a tear or whatever, some kind of a sign. If such a sign is evident, אם היה בעור סימן שיודע בו שזה האור תקרובת עבודה זרה הוא, ככל שהיו עושים, כשקוראים קרע עגול כנגד הלב ומושאים הלב, for example, Rambam says, and we know this from historical sources, that and there are still these things still done to this day. Again, I'm aware of such things in places like Southeast Asia, Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, and such places. They would slaughter an animal and cut an opening in the animal's skin and remove the heart, for example. That was a major part of the worship. So any such skin, any such hide, that have this obvious sign, asurim bahana, they may not be benefited from. And anything similar to this. But if you are unaware of any such sign, and there's no such indication, when you walk into a room, you find all these hides that are now, let's say, spoils of war, then you may use that, you may benefit from it. Now, there's a difference, Rambam now tells us, next halakha, between Avodah Zarah that was performed by and in the possession of a Jew, or that which was performed by or in the possession of a non-Jew. ما بين عبودة زراء شل غوي لعبودة زراء شل يسرائيل. What is the difference between these two things? عبودة زراء شل نوخري, and here you see clearly that the word goy and the word nochri are entirely synonymous. The difference being that nochri is a term from the Torah to refer to a person not from the Jewish people, and the word goy literally means a nation, and is only by way of, in a borrowed sense, refers to a member of any other nation. So both these terms are possible. Avodah Zarah shel nochri asura b'hana'a miyav. Any Avodah Zarah that was in the possession of or performed by a non-Jew, Shana is asur immediately. Shenemar pesila Elohehem tisrafun baish. Their idols must be burnt. Misha pesalo na'asa lo Eloha. In other words, this refers to a person who, for him, the pesel, the statue, the image, is his, from his perspective, a god. It's divine. V'shela Yisrael. On the other, so in other words, as soon as the non-Jew created this image, this statue, this figurine, for the purpose of Avodah Zarah, but has not yet been worshipped by this person, they did not actually make use of it yet, it's only been produced with that in mind, it's immediately asur. But in the case of Israel, of a Jew, until it is worshipped in practice. Shinemar wasam basater. So the pasuk there speaks about a Jew who goes astray and worships Avodah Zarah. Ad sheyasa lo devarim shebaseter. In other words, a person places such a thing, hides it away, obviously because he makes use of it, but he's trying to hide the fact. So he hides it away somewhere, and when necessary, takes it out and does whatever he does. And those things are done baseta. Why? Because Jews are supposed to worship Avodah Zarah. If it was done that way of a goy, then it would not be baseta. And anything used for these purposes, ben shel Yisrael, no matter to whom it might have belonged, אינן אסורים עד שישתמשו בהן לעבודה זרה. There's a difference between the pesel, the statue, the image, the idol, and those things which are used for the purpose of worshipping that object. The other objects, the thing is called Machon Shilo, they, Machon Avodah Zarah, they're only asur the moment they become, they're actually used for that purpose, not from the moment of their production, as opposed to what we said a moment ago about the idol in the case of a non-Jew. This is halakha waw hey. He who produces some kind of idol or image for others, not for himself. And he is definitely guilty of transgressing a mitzvah. In fact, one of the 10 Commandments. for so for so doing. Secharo mutar. However, the wages that he earned by producing this item is mutar. Even if he produces for a non-Jew. And the idol itself, as we said, is a sur bahana miyad, may not be benefited from immediately. Nevertheless, the sachar is mutar. Because, why is this so? Because the way of producing such an item involves many steps and strikes with the mallet and the chisel and what have you. And it is not finished until it is finished. In other words, until it's complete in every way and perfect, it is not considered to be perfect, to have been completed and doesn't yet fully exist. And the last strike of the mallet or mark made with the chisel, that itself is of no specific value that can be estimated. And therefore something which is not shaweh paruta cannot become cannot be the work involved to have done that last finishing touch is not shaweh paruta, and therefore the sachar is not a sur. And until it was completed, it wasn't a sachar for an idol, for producing an idol, because the idol was not yet finished. Very well. Halakha zayin or hey. Halokeh gerut ta'oth min hagoyim. In other words, in modern Hebrew, the word gerut ta'oth refers to the items assembled and later perhaps sold in the junkyard in general. But the original meaning is specifically old, usually rusty pieces of iron. Those are gerut ta'oth. Halokeh gerut ta'oth min hagoyim. Now, so a person may have bought a junkyard from a non-Jew or purchased the contents thereof. So a person may have been some kind of merchant who dealt in scrap iron, in pig iron. Scrap iron will sell it wherever one sells such things to people who require iron. And part of what you bought from this non-Jew included some idols that were tossed away. Perhaps they were broken, perhaps they were cracked, they smashed, whatever it was. But you have such a thing amongst these other items. Im nothan ma'oth v'lo mashach yahzirem legoy. If he paid, but had not yet taken them physically into his possession, then the act of kinyan, of purchasing, is not complete, and it can be considered a mekah ta'uf, something bought under false pretenses or unintentional purchase, and the Jew, according to halacha at least, can back away from such a deal. So if he gave money, if he paid, v'lo mashach, or v'chen imashach, v'lo natan ma'oth, or the opposite, he did one but not the other. Afal pisha mashicha b'voi klona, even though generally the halacha is that the act of mashicha with regards to a non-Jew is sufficient to complete a transaction. Here we can still consider it to be a mekach tov. So if the Jew did both, if he both paid and he was moshech, then it is fully uh, and completely his, and he may not mevatel the Mecca. He may not say, "I'm not interested. I made a mistake. I didn't know." Uh, and if he did so, what does he do? Mashach v'nathan ma'oth yolicha liyam hamelah. He has to destroy it, as we said before. Avodah Zarah has to be destroyed, and one of the surest ways of destroying something in the Eretz Yisrael in those days was to toss it into Yam HaMelach. Who's going? No one can go diving, even dive for it, and the water will also eventually degrade any metal item thrown in there. So the same was done with Ma'oth Ma'aser and various other things. So Yolichal Yam HaMelach, and throw it away. Now, there is some discussion amongst the Rishonim if Yam HaMelach refers to what we call Yam HaMelach or refers to the Mediterranean Sea. Uh, so I want to show you in a moment what Rambam seems to say. So let me put it up just a moment. All right, so this halacha is in Hilchot Arachim Haromim Perek Heth, halacha Yodalad or Heth. Rambam states here, En makdishim v'lo ma'arichin v'lo mahrimim b'zman hazeh. A person does not, should not, must not dedicate anything or the value of something to the mikdash. Why not? Once this was a common and not only a common practice, but a commendable practice. At the present time, there is no mikdash. As Rambam says, she'en sham mikdash b'hata'enu, because of our sins. Kedei lahazek et bidko. A person might think, well, I'm doing it to help in the maintenance of the mikdash, but there is no mikdash, and this now is something which is hekdesh, and it's going to be a michshol. It's going to cause people to sin, to not they will be unaware, and they will use it for their own purposes, and that is asur. So it is asur to be makdish or ma'arich or mahrim, to say that is herim for the mikdash, to say to do the value of that item, that must not be done. We continue. Imigdish, or Hayarich, or Ichrim, if a person did so. Imayitha behema. So if it was, we're talking about an animal that's alive, what do you do? No'il daret b'fanea, al shethamut me'aleha. You lock it into a pen and you allow it to die, which is a terrible waste, and it's a sad thing, but there's no other choice. Uh, it is sad, and it's even cruel in some ways. That is true. But uh, the world should not be and is not to be run by feelings, but by truth and matters of principle, and that which must be done, that which is necessary. So yes, the organization that is concerned primarily with the welfare of animals may be up in arms, but that is what must be done. The Torah most definitely outlaws, whether it's min Torah or Divrei Sofarim is a mahloket in the Talmud, but Thar Ba'al causing unnecessary suffering to a living creature is asur. But this is not unnecessary. This is necessary. But if we're talking about coins, shall we say, or some metallic object, they should be thrown into the sea. This refers to the Mediterranean. Yam Hamelah, and here Rambam adds the term Yam Hamelah, Kedella Abadan, in order to destroy them. So from here, it seems quite clear that Yam Hamelah, I think any ocean or sea, any salty ocean or sea is included in this concept. You could, of course, ask the question: if that is so, why does it say in these halachot, in these sources, Yom HaMelach? Why doesn't it simply say Mashgichol Hayam? But based on what we see in the Rambam, it seems that this is how he understood the matter, at least.
Could it be that Yam refers to any body of water? And he specifically wanted it to be a salty body of water so it would ruin the object more thoroughly?
That's a good question. Well, first of all, the fact is there is things, metallic objects will clearly corrode in salty water much more quickly than in fresh water. But that is not to say they disappear or corrode completely, even after thousands of years. And we know that because we have discovered all kinds of sunk vessels carrying all sorts of objects made of metal, both from 2,000 years ago, shall we say, and from 200 years ago. Battleships with cannon, for example. The cannon can be brought to the surface, and I guess if you work enough on them, you can also even fire them. So there's still the metal is there, and it's not going anywhere. So I'm not sure that it's necessarily because of the fact that the salt water degrades it. It seems more likely that it has to do with the fact that once if you throw it into the sea someplace, it's basically lost to anybody. No one can find it and make use of it. That's the best you can do, essentially. And that could be why Rambam says Yam Hagadol is included. You also have to keep in mind, many Jews living in Eretz Yehuda or Binyamin were relatively close to Yam HaMelach, to the Dead Sea, and could get there and throw things there more easily than they could get to the coast, to the Mediterranean. And that could be why Chazal said Yom HaMelach. And maybe that's what Rambam understood, because that was the common and accessible place and for many people. But really that should apply to any large body of water. And therefore added also Hayam Gadol. That could be how Rambam understood it. So where were we? Halacha Perek Zayin. Right. So we were in Halacha Halacha Zayin. And we were speaking about if the person, the Jew, purchased and became the owner of such objects of Avodah Zarah, he has to, if there's another option, because it's definitely now his, he has to throw, we said, Yom HaMelach. We continue here. V'chen goy, v'chen ger u'roy she'arashu et avotehem goy. It was also true in the case of a non-Jew or a ger tzedek that inherited such items from their father, shall we say. Yachol hu hager lomar legoy. Tol ata avodah zarah wani ma'of. In other words, so you have two brothers. They were born non-Jewish. One converted to Judaism, and now they inherited their father. And amongst the inheritance, there are idols that could be very expensive. And there's also coins, etc. So he can say to the non-Jewish brother, Tol ata avodah zarah, you take these items which pertain to avodah zarah, wani ma'oth, and I'll take the coins. Ata yen nesech, wani peroth, you take the wine that is connected to avodah zarah also, and I will take the whatever other, there may be a silo of wheat or something that's called peroth, any edible food stuff. But this is before it comes into his possession. Just as we saw with this a Jew a moment ago who purchased the Grut Ta'oth from the Goy, and without intending to, he became the owner of these idols that were part of the junkyard, part of the contents of the junkyard. Here too, before he becomes the owner, because it is now still up for division between himself and his brother, then he may still say, you take this and I'll take that. But once it comes into his possession, once if they simply say, whatever is in this room is yours, whatever is in that room is mine, shall we say, whatever he finds there, which is Avodah Zarah, it's asur. Okay, we shall stop here for today. Heyu beruchim. Hizku v'yamas levavchem kol hameyachalim ladonai. Shalom u'nisahom.
Thank you, Rabbi Bar-Hayim. We would like to encourage our viewers to share these videos with friends and send in your responses. We would also like to suggest the following opportunity to our viewers. If you identify with Rabbi Bar-Hayim's message and would like to sponsor or dedicate a video interview with the rabbi in honor or memory of a loved one, if you would like to obtain Birkon Nusach Eretz Yisrael or invite the rabbi for a speaking engagement, please email us at office@machonshilo.org.